I thought we'd take a look at the internet weather for this week. Not as interesting as the weather we've been having in the Northeast, or even, I guess, down in the south of Texas. It's been even worse. But it's been pretty regular type of activity, nothing super surprising. But we'll take a look at some of the recent changes over the past week. So the first chart here is the most probe ports. And this is just generally volume of scanning activity, not necessarily if there's a lot of people doing it, just that there's a lot of scan probe activity on it, which means, scan attempts, each connection attempt. A lot of ports we've talked about historically, if you've watched the program before. So you've got number one is your Telnet 23 TCP, 445 TCP is your Microsoft Windows file sharing. 22 TCP is SSH. The 123 UDP is NTP, the Network Time Protocol. That's risen 5 spots. I'm going to guess that this is likely as a result of NTP used as a amplification for DDoS vector. I'm not 100% certain about that, but it's historically been used for NTP amplification, very similar to DNS amplification. And since it's UDP, they spoof the source IP and redirect all the traffic back to their intended victim. So I'm guessing that that's probably why this one rose up here. It's kind of hard to infer just from the chart itself. 80 TCP is your web traffic. We see a lot of scanning on that in general anyway. 1433 TCP is your Microsoft SQL Server. This has historically always been in the top 10, I think. Just probably people scanning around for open Microsoft SQL servers with weak passwords. 81 TCP is the go-ahead web server, is usually the most likely culprit here. This is another web server. The go-ahead web server is, it's a tiny little embedded software web server package that a lot of IoT devices deploy. Has a very small footprint, very lightweight, doesn't have a lot of functionality, but it does have a vulnerability in it that a lot of people know about and exploit. So it's used on more than one type of IoT device, usually like, small SOHO routers, DVR cameras, like the security camera things, and a bunch of other types of appliances as well, IoT type devices. And so we know that there's some exploits on that. And you typically see this port, within the top 20 at least, being scanned for frequently. HTTPS is also in there. And then lastly, rounding out is 3389 TCP, which is your remote desktop protocol. That's also usually up at the top. Again, a lot of these, like the RDP, your SSH, and Telnet, all provide remote control capability of a device. So that's why they get scanned a lot, because if they can get the password for that, they have basically full control of the device.
So not a lot has really jumped around too much this week, it looks like, John.
No, some shifts here and there, but I would say the only big mover really was the NTP one, right? That's what it looks like to me. Some other ones swap positions from the previous week, but right, not a whole lot of change. Things get a little more interesting on the next slide. So this is the most sources probing. And this chart is generally more interesting to me because it means you've got a lot of individual source IPs all scanning on the same port in high volume, which usually means that there's some coordinated activity there. Like you've got a botnet all scanning on a specific port, trying to find things or receiving some instructions to do that in unison. So again, we see a lot of the typical culprits, the 445 TCP. Again, there's been a lot of historic. WannaCry is probably the most recent one where there's a vulnerability that was leveraged. There's probably still a lot of latent WannaCry infections out there that are still scanning for this, trying to infect additional machines. The 23 TCP and 22 TCP, again, Telnet and SSH, very typical because a lot of other, I mentioned IoT devices, a lot of routers, DVR systems, all kinds of IoT appliances have one of these two ports open for remote management, so that's very common. 8080 TCP is also frequently seen scanned for. This is often a kind of a default administrative port for a lot of different types of web services. So like Tomcat notably uses this as a port for management of the Tomcat server. But there's also a bunch of other middleware types of software that use this port as well that people are probably scanning for. So the ones I highlighted that I found most interesting of what we have here is 8291 TCP and 8728 TCP. We'll talk about I'll show some more detail on that one in a second. These two are actually related to each other, and we'll talk about that. And then 2457 UDP, this is a newcomer to the chart, even though it was our last week. I think Matt covered it last week. But this one's also slightly interesting, but not necessarily a problem. So we'll take a look at that as well. And then I didn't highlight it, but 27032 UDP probably figures in with 2457 UDP. So if you're a gamer, this might mean something to you. So I might have revealed what this is all about. But let's take a look at the first two, number 5 and 6 first. So this is the scan source activity on port 8728 and 8291 TCP. This is a 90-day screenshot of the activity. And you can see prior to about 12, maybe 23, December 23rd, there's a big lull in scanning activity. There was a day or maybe day and a half where there was a big spike here. And then you go back further and there really wasn't much. But this, and then since this point, around the 23rd of December, we see a very regular pattern of scanning on both ports at the same time. So you're seeing, regular, pretty much similar volumes. This is a stacked chart. So you're seeing about equal volumes of blue and red in each, time frame here. And it's also very diurnal in that it kind of, peaks and flows across the span of a day. This is actually the MikroTik router. Both these ports are related to MikroTik. So MikroTik routers are very widely deployed. It's another small kind of home router for the most part. And there are various vulnerabilities over the years on this router OS for MikroTik that people have exploited in order to take control of the device. A lot of times they're using them as, believe it or not, cryptocurrency miners or even just other types of jump servers or whatnot for their own, malicious, that's what the bad guys are using it for the most part. The MikroTik website actually has some really good information about each of these ports and what their functions are. 8291 is Winbox, which is, I forget exactly what Winbox does for the MikroTik router, but it's a critical part of the router OS function, as well as the API service that runs on 8728. We generally see both of these scanned at the same time. I believe most of them are open on both. If you have one, both are going to be open, and there's different exploits available on each of them. You can probably, I put a screenshot in here. Exploit DB is kind of a well-known, legitimate repository of exploit code for various types of devices and software. So they have some examples of some of the recent vulnerabilities that you can go look at to understand that. I also mentioned Tenable, actually someone from Tenable posted a blog that actually has a really good explanation of how these vulnerabilities work on the various ports. So I recommend, if you're really interested, to take a look at that. There's been many vulnerabilities on MikroTik over the past probably 4 or 5 years. So this activity does ebb and flow quite a bit. So while we did have a lull back in December, November there, and then it's since come back up, it's just people they're probably looking at something else. So the bad bad actors were scanning for something else during those lull sessions there, and now they've got renewed interest in trying to find vulnerable MikroTik routers again. So 2457 UDP, I think Matt covered this yesterday, or last week, I'm sorry. And this is a new one. I didn't really know what this was, but I thought it was very interesting that this activity really started around February 6th of this year, so not that long ago, sometime this month. And it has steadily been increasing since that point. And then again, this is the number of scanned sources that we see. So you see on the first day, we had about 1,000. The next day it was 2,500 or so, and it kept going up, and now we're at about 9,500 scan sources per hour that we're seeing. So this is very classic, boy, this looks like a botnet, because this is kind of how botnets look when you see them. They usually grow in shape. The one thing I'll say that doesn't look like a botnet is a lot of times botnets will have a very sawtooth waveform, I call it, where they start scanning really rapidly and they have kind of the sharp decline. And actually I'm going to show that to you really quickly, just so we have something to discuss here a little bit more in detail. But this is more classic botnet, how it starts really abruptly and then it kind of like tails off in this sawtooth waveform. Or even in here, you can kind of see how it zips and then it goes up again really quick, all at once really fast, and then zoop down again. Oops. That's more typical of a botnet type of initiated scanning. When we look at these ones, you can see they're very gradual up and then gradual down, gradual up, gradual down. It's not, all start at once and then kind of go down in a slope there. So when we actually take a look at what this activity is, it is a very popular new game that has come out. So on port 2457 UDP, there's this new game called Valheim, which I never heard of until about 2 weeks ago. I noticed in my Steam friends list that basically every friend I've ever had is playing this game. So it must be very popular, and it sounds like it is. They sold 3 million copies in under 3 weeks. So you might be asking yourself, why would a game kind of show up on our scanning activity? Or why would it appear as scanning? So it's interesting, and we've seen this before. We probably talked about it on the show before, but I don't know if we've had a recent example. This is a good one, especially Steam games. And the reason behind that is because when you're a player and you bring up the Steam browser, you can bring up the server browser. I'm kind of showing Counter-Strike here. It's the only screenshot I could find online. And the first thing you do is you get a list of all the servers that are running this game. And then what the Steam client here does is says, okay, for this list of servers, usually it's going to be more than that, probably like several thousand of them, I'm going to go poke each and every one of them on port 2457 for this game, Valheim, and find out like what is it currently playing and what's my latency to it, how many people are playing. So it gets this information, then it does that for every single server in the list. So to us, as the layperson analyst not knowing what this port is, or our algorithms not knowing what this port is, it looks a lot like scanning because you basically have one source IP that's reaching out to many different IPs on the same port, which is exactly what botnet activity looks like. Where when I say one source IP, I mean you have many source IPs, but they're each reaching out to many, many different, destination IPs on the same port. So, just that behavior looks very scanning-like. And in reality, it is a scan. I basically got a list of several thousand IP addresses, and then I hit each and every one of them on the same port. So that's why that shows up like that. So long story short, not that big of a problem. But interesting that it shows up in our data so dramatically here in terms of its shape. But not anything to worry about, in my opinion. And but it did make it into the top 10, so that's interesting. That means there's a lot of for something, especially when we're looking at typically botnets of like 30,000 devices, 50,000 devices, all scanning on Telnet or something like that. Those are typically the types of things we see in the top 10. Here, 9,000 is not insignificant. So. It's an interesting new port to see in the scan reports here. And I think that's all we had for this week. I don't know if anybody else had any other observations or.
I was looking back at the first slide, whereas you have echo reply. So I was, in any network that I set up, I would always turn off any echo reply, ICMP. Echo reply, echo request, all of that I turn off. so that they don't know I exist. Like my Juniper here at home, which I won in a raffle, might I add. But anyway, so I went to a Juniper class, and I had a Pix firewall first, and then I went to a Juniper class, and they were giving away some of their the class Junipers. And so, so I set it up, but I always set up, no echo reply, echo request, so that I just don't exist to the public.
And that's a good thing to do. I would highly recommend that, because what they're doing here is they're sending out echo requests in an attempt to discover, live devices on the internet, to kind of perhaps, shorten the amount of address space they want to scan. So, they might do an initial real quick ping sweep just to find what devices look alive, and then they'll go more interrogatively on specific ports. So if you, like you said, Kim, if you disable echo replies on your firewalls or routers, especially your internet-facing ones, that kind of puts you maybe off the radar a little bit, and they might not, follow up with further scans on other ports.